Hello and welcome to the Naru FastCast with your hosts, Dave and Josh Masson.
Pull up a chair and listen to us discussing fasting and health-related topics.
On?
Okay,
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Nice. Right. Welcome back, everyone. Episode 4. Smashing through these.
I know, I can't believe it. Hopefully you're getting quite a bit out of them. I know we're really enjoying doing them, actually.
Yeah, really enjoying it, other than having to spend time with you. But
of course. But, I haven't dragged my child across any races today. This is just, how's your week been?
Yeah, good, man. Good. Busy in the clinic. It's been a good week. It's one of those weeks that's just like flown by. I feel like June's just done that, and I'm just a bit like, what's going on here? It's like already July coming up. It's just wild. But yeah, man, good week. Lots of stuff happening with business wise, and it's really interesting patients this week actually. Yeah, how about you? How's your week?
Yeah, good. Same, busy. Obviously, just been doing some background work on the podcast this week, which has been quite good, and been busy week with the boys and stuff, so it's been good. Yeah,
nice.
No dramas.
Cool. So, what have you got for us this week? What have you found?
Well, we were just discussing before we started this that I'm going to take you through something which I think is really interesting, and it's really helped me. And it's a little on the heavy side at the start, so just bear with me. And then we're going to end on something a bit sort of lighthearted from Joshy, but it's really interesting. I think it's a topic that we don't really talk about. Isn't talked about a lot, and it's something called leaky gut syndrome. Okay, and it's just trying to sort of understand how fasting really sort of fits in with that, and kind of what other things we could that we do from our diet that kind of impact it. So we kind of briefly talked last week about the circadian rhythm, and I just want to just recap over that, because the circadian rhythm is this really important thing that flows through us, day and night, and it's responsible for releasing hormones. And so if we sort of take our day, we wake up in the morning, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because it's really relevant to the gut. So at night time, as we said a couple of weeks ago about melatonin, as melatonin rises, which helps us go to sleep, our insulin levels go down. And that's because the gut is not expecting to experience food. So things like that tend to shut down. The gut tends to repair at night time. The peristalsis, so the movement of the gut slows down. It's why when you wake up in the morning, you need a poo, because it's waking up and getting your gut started. So a lot of repair goes on at night time. The mucus is repaired and all this type of stuff that goes on. So we do not want to be eating at night. So when we wake up in the morning, we have the sunlight that comes in and hits our eye, which is why we're always talking about going outside, getting sunlight. This then goes into something called melanopsin in our eye. Then it links into the brain. And in the brain, we've got this big clock center called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Okay, it's basically like the timer. And then from here, it starts firing off signals. So it starts saying, right, hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, you're going to do this. Hypothalamus, pituitary, gonads, you're going to be doing this. So it's telling you all of your hormones, when to start, what to start doing, because the body is a very busy thing, and it sort of needs certain cues to tell it when to start doing things. And that's why we really sort of focus on sleep, because obviously if this rhythm shifts, so if you sleep in one day, then the rhythm of what you'll normally be doing, your hormones, everything like that, suddenly change, which is why jet lag gives you a hangover feeling.
Yeah.
And then you've got like the change in sunlight, and you've also got the change in food time, because obviously the gut will be waiting to receive some food to start doing its jobs. Okay, so the gut, so important. So in a nutshell, in our guts, I'm going to focus on one thing which is called LPS. Okay, lipopolysaccharide, and you might have heard people talking about it, called endotoxin. Okay, now this plays absolute havoc for inflammation in the brain, for our mood, for our cardiovascular disease, and it actually is reduced. So the gram-negative bacteria, so we've got different types of bacteria, but one of them carry this in the outside of it, okay? Now it produces more of it, okay? But fasting helps to reduce down the number of bacteria that produce that and increase the bacteria that fight against it. So this is where fasting can really help with that gut makeup, okay? So this is where I was saying I had a personal experience where I used to sort of suffer from IBS and really bad gut problems. And it wasn't until I sort of really cleaned that all up and actually realized how much better I felt, how my asthma was better, my eczema is cleared up. And I noticed a direct correlation between me having something that irritates my gut and a flare up of my inflammation problems like my eczema and my asthma. And it kind of got me sort of thinking. So I looked into this and it's incredible. So when we talk about the gut, we're always talking about this thing called the microbiome. So you've kind of got your small intestine, which absorbs all of like your amino acids and absorbs all of your protein and stuff. And then it leaves at the end, where obviously your poo is basically made. It kind of leaves the insoluble fiber and the carbohydrate, okay? And you've got this mass of bacteria, basically. And it's around about 1.2 kilograms. So can you imagine 1.2 kilograms of bacteria? But it influences your immune system by 70%. So that's insane. Do you know what I mean? There's one little dump of bacteria can have that much of an impact on your immune response. And the interesting thing about immune and inflammation, things like this, is that 80% of all cancers are detected by the body. We just cannot generate a big enough immune response to get rid of them. So when you sort of think about that, you sort of think, wow, that's incredible. So we've got something that can actually is responsible for 70% of our immune system, and most cancer cells are detected, but we just can't generate it because everything in our lifestyle is suppressing this immune system, making us all inflamed. Okay, so we've got this area in the gut, 1.2 kilograms, lots of bacteria, viruses, all these different types of things, but we can sometimes get this proliferation of this stuff called LPS. Okay, so when we talked about that, about light and dark cycles, obviously these can really affect the actual volume of it. If sunlight hits our arm, it actually starts to have an impact on the bacteria in our gut, which is nuts. So LPS, okay, let's dive into this with respect to cardiovascular disease, okay? So you're going to bear with me. We're going to go through sort of a bit of a cholesterol thing here. So everyone's probably heard of good cholesterol, bad cholesterol, okay? Now I'm interested in this because of my history of heart disease. I had heart disease, had open heart surgery when I was younger. So heart health is always really important. So with the gut, we've got two different barriers in our body. We've got the gut barrier, and we've got the blood-brain barrier in the brain. So it surrounds the brain and protects it from things that can be toxic to the brain. And the same thing we've got is in our gut. Now, interestingly, the gut is basically made up as a protective layer of these things called enterocytes. And they're basically just like gut cells. And they're squished together with these things called tight junctions. Okay, so they prevent the gut from opening up. But when the gut opens up, and this is predominantly when we have more of this LPS, okay, so it causes the gut to open up. And this floods the body with the LPS, with sort of neuroirritants, sort of food allergens and things that shouldn't be in the blood system, but get let through this barrier, okay? Now, we're talking about cholesterol, okay? So a lot of people that are fasting, they might sort of increase their, go into ketosis. And when we go into like burning ketones, we actually create sort of more cholesterol, okay? So there's this molecule called LDL, okay? And what it does is it wraps triglycerides and cholesterol and things like that are made by the liver. And it picks them up and it takes them to the body. So the body can actually produces 80% of its own cholesterol. So when people sort of say, I don't want to be eating too much cholesterol, well, your body's making most of it anyway. So most cells can make it and your liver makes it, but the body can't make triglycerides. So it needs something. So obviously if you're going into ketosis, you're making more of this. Okay, so the body makes this stuff called LDL. So it packages it up into a little ball, takes it around to the cells, okay, and then distributes off this stuff, brings it back around, okay, and then when it gets back to the liver, there's something on the top of this molecule called ApoB, okay, and the liver takes it back up again and gets rid of it. But when we have LPS in our system, what it does is LPS actually binds the top of this LDL molecule, okay, which is really interesting because when this gentleman called Dr. Seem Malhotra is basically a cardiovascular surgeon in London, and he was saying that it's interesting because as you get more of an infection, your actual LDL goes up, because what it is a mechanism to help take bacteria out of the blood. And it's why there's a sort of a correlation with elderly people that have low LDL, low cholesterol, with more risk of dying of things like infections and stuff. So what happens is this LDL molecule, okay, has this signal on top, the LDL, which is basically like a key card you get, when you go to a hotel to say, open up the door, okay? So if you imagine you've got this molecule that goes around and gets smaller and smaller as it starts giving off its triglycerides and its cholesterol and all these bits, comes back to the liver, and you take out some of the LPS, so that endotoxin that we don't want in our system, and it gets rid of it in the liver. But when LPS is bound and you have high blood sugar levels and things like that, it can make this molecule that's carrying around all this important stuff become really small, okay, and irritated. And as it's going around, sometimes it gets stuck in our kind of arterial walls, okay? And that's interesting. So obviously we hear about heart attacks, strokes, and this type of stuff. And what it does is it kind of gets stuck inside. And because this LPS molecule, so the endotoxin, is a signal to the immune system that it's foreign, this starts to get attacked, and it starts to then sort of build like what we call a foam cell, which is this stuff that creates a plaque. So we've all heard of plaques being built up in our in our arteries and things which leads to heart attacks. So it's quite incredible to think that just from our gut leaking something out can increase our risk of heart attacks and strokes. So when you think about when you eat something, you kind of you're not really mindful, that could cause this opening up and leaking in my gut. So atherosclerosis is one of the sort of leading forms of how we go on to get heart disease and things. So it is really, really important. And you sort of think about that, what's gone on there, you can kind of understand how actually maybe fasting can really help to reduce the number of those cells. Now, we talked about two different barriers. Now, when we talk about the blood-brain barrier, so we talked about the gut, how it's got these junctions that basically keep these cells connected together. Well, when we release LPS into the system, okay, it can go up and do exactly the same to your blood-brain barrier in your brain. So it makes it open up and makes it leaky. And they reckon that 50% of the damage to the brain starts before you start getting the classic tau tangles and things like that in the brain for Alzheimer's. So they think that it starts by this blood-brain barrier breaking down, letting neurotoxins into the brain, which is the start of having decline in cognitive decline, things like that. So again, in the gut and the brain. So the brain and the gut are so interlinked. It's incredible. It really is. We're not going to get into it now because it's a very complicated topic, but the gut-brain axis is really important. So they act together. And if you think about how much of effect LPS, so this endotoxin, does in your body. They've done studies in humans where they give you an injection of this endotoxin, okay, and it can cause you to become depressed. It can cause you to become depressed. It can cause inflammation to go up 100-fold. And what's quite incredible is that that's just that's an amount that you can feel. So when they do it, when they inject it into one person and they inject it to someone else with saline, the person that's been injected with LPS will have these symptoms. Now, when they also inject someone with a small amount of LPS, okay, without them feeling it, they still get 100 times increase in inflammation. So if you can't feel these things, but you're eating and doing the wrong thing, it's all happening under the background, underneath, and you don't know. And so inflammation is key. So, and we talked about high blood sugar levels as well, has an impact on inflammation. So again, fasting does all of these things. It helps to increase the good bacteria in the gut that help to reduce down the endotoxin. We also have this reduction in blood sugar levels, which can help. So that helps when this LDL molecule is in circulation. And it also is important for reducing down inflammation. Okay, so we've got these kind of two things going on here. And I think it's
really important. Really interesting.
And so how does this happen? Well, sometimes if we sort of look at it in the form of, we all know about serotonin, okay?
Yeah.
So if you were to eat some meat, or if you eat something that had an amino acid in tryptophan, okay, this gets taken from the gut, gets taken up to the brain and turned to serotonin, okay? Now, obviously, we know that that's involved in mood, long-term planning, gut motility, lots of different things in the brain, okay? Now, if you put the same amino acid, so if I gave you tryptophan, but you had a high amount of LPS in your stomach, what it can do is it can prevent it from forming properly. And it goes on and it forms this thing called kyuranine. And then this turns into quinolinic acid, okay? And this goes from our gut into our brain and is a neurotoxin. Mm-hmm. So you just go, so hold on a minute, I can eat the same thing, but in the presence of inflammation, that one thing that's really important for my mood, for long-term planning, for connection, can be the same thing that can become a neurotoxin in my brain. Mm-hmm. Now, if that same brain has been exposed to LPS and it's leaky, then you're going to get this endotoxin, the neurotoxin, that goes into the brain and causes inflammation. Yeah. So, I think what we sort of talk about, we spoke about this last week, it's not about sort of that golden bullet. It's a lot of sort of, golden pellets. And I feel that, nothing is just binary. Nothing is just very simple down the line. There is always so much to it. So when we think about sort of LPS again, it also does something called inflammaging. So it also increases the aging of our inflammatory response, because it causes inflammatory response, but it also makes them make more things called cytokines, which cause more inflammation. So our immune system is recruited, it then irritates it, it creates inflammation, and this carries on. And it's incredible, because when they look at, you've probably heard of the, what they call the blue zones.
Yeah.
Okay. When they look at the blue zones, when they take from everything, so telomere length to kidney function, blood sugar levels, HbA1c, all these types of things, when they test for everything, the one thing that's different between the ages of them is inflammation. Mm-hmm. And it is just the one thing. So you can see in this instant how inflammation can be a big, big factor. So obviously we've talked about that. And just to go back one more thing, which is the LPS can also, so this endotoxins produced by this bacteria, can also interfere with insulin signaling. So again, the LPS in the blood circulatory system compounds that thing of having higher sugar levels, which causes that molecule I said earlier to become more toxic in the blood. And again, more of a problem. So what's a really good example of this that everyone would know? And one of them is celiac. Okay, if you have celiac disease, you suffer from effectively a really bad form of leaky gut syndrome. The reason is that what happens is you don't so much increase more LPS. Okay, but what you do is these, I was saying before about these tight junctions that stick together. Okay, and they are these enterocytes, which are basically the cells that line the gut wall, okay? And then they have a big protective layer of mucus on top, okay? But when you have gluten, it causes these tight junctions to basically open up, okay? And it's really interesting because it produces something called zonulin, okay? Now you can actually do a test for zonulin. So our son had a problem with his gut, and we had some tests done on him, and actually we found his zonulin was higher. So it showed that he had an actual intolerance to wheat, because what the wheat was doing was it was making these his cells in his gut open up and allow more inflammatory pathogens out. Okay. Now, again, what can you do? Well, in celiacs, if you have obviously gluten, that tight junctions can be open for up to 3 weeks. Okay, so it can be up to 3 weeks after. It's why, like, a lot of people say they have fuzzy heads. They feel quite, they don't, their brain, they've got brain fog, and they feel lethargic. They feel achy. Things are, they just don't feel great. Whereas they feel more sharper when that happens. And obviously, we were talking about that exposure to potentially that LPS. Okay, so you can also do this by increasing the amount of bacteria that produce this thing called butyrate. Okay, now this is one of the energy that basically our gut cells need to become more resistant against this stuff. Okay, so they stay more stuck together. And again, fasting can help by producing more of this. Producing more of this that can help the gut become more resistant. So again, it's just another fantastic example that you can do. And obviously things you can have in your diet, like sort of inulin, beta-glycans from oats and things like that, can also sort of help to feed this our sort of enterocytes, so our gut cells that hold it all together and make them more resilient. And people say, oh, gluten, is it really that bad? But if you've heard all of this, and say, for example, your gut opens up that tight junction for 3 hours, would you really want some of that endotoxin floating around your body? And that's, for me, it's sort of, again, it's within context, but part of me goes, well, no wonder I don't feel great after I eat gluten.
Yeah.
And to me, it's sort of just, piecing all these things together. So we're not saying that fasting is going to cure it, because if you do fasting, then you eat a load of gluten, but fasting can help it and almost make it better if you're doing it in the presence of maybe trying to avoid gluten, as well. We're not saying go gluten free in here. We're just giving you information, essentially what you do with the type of thing. So yeah, I think that was kind of what I had. So
that was a lot.
Bit heavy. Sorry. No, sorry, it was heavy, but
no, it's good. It's good. Well, I think it's one of those things where sometimes sometimes it feels like you can be majoring in the minor, but what it's about looking at is understanding that this is just one element that could be resulting in an excessive inflammatory cascade in the body. Compound that with all the other things you do in your life, such as high levels of stress, different levels of toxicity that we all experience for different reasons. If you had smoking, if you have a heavy night drinking, or whatever it is, anything else that's in there, injury that creates inflammation. On top of that, there's so many things that are going to be stimulating this inflammatory pathway, adding to that continual problem. And I think that it's just about presenting different avenues of lenses to look at the body, to go, well, look, there is this thing that exists that can actually, and I think it's about connecting those dots between bigger systems, because, if you're and then I don't mean to be crass or, be judgmental about other medical professionals, but, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And it's only just with my experience of working in the medical field, but we have specialisms for a reason, and it's really helpful. But what that does is it narrows focus, right? So if you're a neurologist, you're going to look at the neurotoxicity of certain chemicals, not necessarily branching out into the kind of the gut relation, although I'm sure they do these days. But the whole point of it being is that sometimes you can get, what's nice is when you start bringing in, okay, well, you've got this one molecule that can start from a damage in the gut. That damage in the gut can then lead to a neurological damage, also a cardiovascular one, because like you were saying with the LDL and the foam cells and the plaque formation and things of that nature. And so what you're doing is, understanding is that a lot of these things that cause inflammation, the inflammation becomes multi-system, it's not even a word, multi-system. And as a result of it, you can have this wide variety of symptoms without even realizing it, and you don't even know what you're necessarily attributing it to. And
I think I see this so often in my practice that in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, so when they're born, this microbiome is growing inside them. So it's fed with the colostrum, and it's fed with obviously breast milk, and obviously people choose other milk, but the seeding, which is what they call, happens more proficiently, and you get a more of a broader microbiome with breast milk. Okay. And it's so interesting because the first 1,000 days, if you have one broad spectrum antibiotic, in the first 1,000 days of a child's life, you increase their risk of getting eczema and asthma and hay fever by 45%.
That's madness.
And then for every other additional dose of broad spectrum antibiotic, you can increase the risk by 7%. Yeah. And what I find incredible is that you have people with irritable bowel diseases, massive, they're bleeding, these poor people are so inflamed. And you can take poo from someone like me that's got a good gut and insert their stool into the stool of someone with inflammatory bowel disease, and it goes.
Yeah. That's wild.
So we sort of think, and again, it's then from the other aspect of it, and this is why I think, sometimes when it feels really technical, you try to take away certain bits. But what I'm saying is that if you've got a dog and you go pick up dog poo, it's horrific, it stings, it's disgusting. But people will be like, I haven't been for a poo for 4 days, and you're like, you're harboring that turd in you.
Exactly.
And it's full of waste. If these junctions and stuff aren't tight and and they're going to be leaching things back in, when people have certain conditions like, I think it's Parkinson's, or they're an alcoholic, we actually give them lactulose solution that basically neutralizes these sort of like a nitrate products that can go up and cause problems in the brain. So you're like, okay, but it's okay not to go to the toilet. And it's nuts. This gut that we just chuck anything in.
Yeah, for sure.
Thinks that it's okay to keep hammering it. But like we were saying, we talk about, last week we were talking about sleep, and then we're talking about exercise, and then we're talking about the gut, which is saying that actually you don't need to just focus on right now I'm a vegan, or now I'm full exercise, or now I'm doing this. It's about doing all the little bits. Regularly.
Yeah. I don't want your poo, mate. You can keep that. But no, I think it's interesting as well, because we're growing up as or developing as an osteopath. I did classical osteopathy for a while, which included some naturopathy. And although it's not a topic that's steeped in literature, it's one that's steeped in clinical kind of observations, if you like. But an observation or theory from the naturopathic model, which is an interesting observation, is they often talk about the atopic pathway and it going skin, lung, bowel, and you see the symptoms happen in reverse. So your skin, your lung, and your bowel are like the main excretors of waste, right? The kidneys just filter the blood, right? So when the bowel packs up, then their theory is that the body then uses the other two mechanisms to excrete the waste. So anecdotally, I used to find if you asked enough people who are atopic, so it means they've got asthma and eczema as well. When your asthma's worse, is your eczema better? And they'll say yes. And when your eczema's worse, is your asthma better? Yes. Now they would draw the inference that it's because of the body using whichever external pathway for waste release to be able to do so. And then the other interesting thing, which is quite interesting, I think, from an anecdotal perspective, but is the idea that, eczema on the crease of the arm, back of the knees, often mostly associated with being a warm, moist area. But also if you look at it dermatologically and from a dermatomal perspective, and dermatomes are where your skin and your nervous system are come from the same ectoderm when you're born or develop as a fetus. And so what happens is they're intricately mapped. So your ring finger is literally split in half. So you can get numbness and tingling on the inside, on the ring finger, and not on the other side. And that's if like the ulnar nerve distribution's impacted. So it's so exact, you can literally split a finger in half with that nervous system. But anyway, I digress. The point being is that this area of the inside of the elbow, let's take, if you look at it from a chart of, okay, what's the dermatome? Okay, like T1-2, kind of C8, T1 going up to T2. And you map that against what area of the spine innervates the lungs. It's in that area, right? Same thing with the back of the legs, where you've got kind of S1, S2 going down there. If you look at that on a chart, what nerves innervate the S? What does that S1, S2 innervate? It's the bowel. And people draw inferences that could be also an associative release. So we have an anecdata coming at you there, but it's interesting to hear a very kind of comprehensive review on what you're talking about there with regards to the data and the physiology, and then applying it to something more clinical that I've seen in the past and the theoretical models I've heard of. It's interesting, right? Because some people listening to this might not have necessarily kept up with a lot of the data and stuff, but then, they hear those connections and then they're like, oh, well, hang on a minute. Well, my kid's got eczema and asthma, and I noticed that when the asthma's really bad, the eczema's better and stuff. And all it is, the reality of it is that what you need to do to fix there is exactly what you said, which is just get the bowels moving, right? Yeah. And as soon as the bowels move, the waste releases, and then the person feels a lot better. So I think it's really interesting. I think the gut is a phenomenally vast place that we haven't, yet explored.
And I think, just going back to what you were saying, just to sort of finish on this point that, I have suffered with eczema I've suffered with asthma from the age of 18 months. And I suffered with eczema from the age of about 14. And, I paid privately to go see two different consultant dermatologists. And I've been to consultants, in Bath and everywhere. And same thing came out. It's not related to your diet. It's not related to diet. Went away traveling for over a year and the eczema went. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, okay, well, maybe it's the stress. Or maybe it's something else. It came back. Eczema came back again. I was like, okay, this is weird. Then about 6 months ago, work's very busy. I went out and started getting a coffee. Okay. Eczema came back horrifically. So me really focusing on my fasting cleared up my eczema by about 80%, but there was still about 20% left where it was still awful, bleeding and stuff like this on my hands. And then my wife turns to me, she's like, well, you have milk in your coffee, right? So I'm adding an irritant. And she was like, just try stopping that for a bit. Now it's gone again. And a bit like you were saying to your point, where was I getting it? In the creases of my arms. My asthma was bad. My eczema was bad. I was getting a bit of acne. And you sort of think, well, it's really interesting. Now that's gone. I feel better, sleep better, mood's better. Everything's back to normal again. And you sort of think, wow, that's really interesting. So I think, again, just because we're feeling like this doesn't mean that suddenly we need to think, right, we need more testosterone in our life. No, we need to be doing more of this. Sometimes it's just things going in.
Yeah, for sure.
Nice. So so sorry, you probably listened to it about 6 times because it's pretty nerdy. So how's yours?
Yeah, well, if anyone's still with us, so mine's a bit different. Mine's a bit of a different approach. Mine comes from more, it was a thing that I was reading recently that more around business and money and things of that nature. And I spoke to a financial advisor years ago, and as we were talking, we were just drawing these kind of parallels between health and wealth. And just because there's so many parallels exist, if you invest in money early, you make more money as you go older. It compounds, right? If you invest in your health earlier, it compounds. People who have all focus a lot on money and not a lot on their health, all the rest of it. So it was really interesting because going through some of these things, I was like, well, actually, if I just change the word money or whatever to health, actually a lot of these things correlated. Right. And so what it ended up becoming was like, there's some really useful kind of unconventional health hacks, if you like, around what might help stimulate some thought process for people, because how you do anything is how you do everything, right? So this will hopefully help you in your health, because that's probably why you're listening to this, but it might also help you with finance or your business if you can create the parallels. So the first one, which is a pretty easy one, but it's kind of going to carry out the tone of the other one. So I've got 8 unconventional health statements here. So the first one is get leverage, right? So leverage is kind of getting, what's the amount of output I can achieve per unit of time, right? So what that basically means is that if I've got loads of leverage on something, that means that I can achieve a huge amount of output for the unit of time that I'm using. Yeah. And what's happening with people's health is that you find is that people they just don't have enough leverage. And so therefore they're doing all these things, but they're not achieving a big enough output for the amount of time they're putting into it. And so hopefully by listening to some of our content, they're becoming educated by joining the 28-day fasting challenge that we've got up. What it's going to do is going to help you give you more leverage, right? Because it's going to give you more things that you can get more output in per unit of time you're applying. Okay. So if you've only got an hour a day to apply or 2 hours a day to, really focus in on doing stuff for your health, then you want to make sure that what you're achieving in those 2 hours is really beneficial. So what that means is if you achieve very little, you've got very little leverage, right? If you're achieving loads in those 2 hours, you've got loads of leverage. Okay. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah,
nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So that's the first one. So it's getting leverage is really, really important. It's an important thing of life. The more you can achieve in generally per unit of time is always going to be better. So that's going to kind of build the tone. Next thing is health flows to where attention goes. Okay. So if you focus all day on clothes, or you focus all day on, thinking about cars or thinking about certain YouTube videos or something, that's where all your attention goes, right? And so what it's about understanding is health will go to wherever health will flow, to wherever attention goes. So if in your diet, in your health routine, let's say you're someone who obsesses about diet all the time, like that's your thing. Nutrition is the thing you want to do. Well, guess what? Like that's where all of your attention is going to go to. And as a result of it, you might be really good in the diet area, right? But as a result of it, you might be lacking in your exercise, right? You might not be fasting. You might not be getting enough cold spring. You might not be getting out in enough sunlight. You might not be doing all these other things which are really healthy, but you're so focused on nutrition and that's the thing you believe. And it's, again, with part of our challenge and part of the content we're trying to get out there, it's kind of going, right, we want to get you to have that attention on a few things, right? So that you can actually start allowing that health to flow into not just the nutritional area of your life, but also the physical area, the psychological area, the spiritual area, all those different things.
That is a really good point, because you know what? I had it the other day where people were like, what if I do my workout and it's near my fasting area? So it means I can't take my protein. But a bit like you were saying, it's like that super focus on just the workout rather than the overall aspect. Well, actually fasting might help with your overall health and recovery, and and then a bit like saying, so don't not just focus on the outcomes, because if you're not going to get the protein synthesis without doing that exercise, I think, like you said, it's really good, because we talk about that a lot, about the morning stuff, sunlight, delay your coffee intake, try fasting, try doing some exercise and those types of things, and they are all multi-platforms. So that makes really, I like that. Yeah.
Cool. The next one is a bit controversial, but ignore health advice from unhealthy people, right? So what I mean by this is people who are unhealthier than you want to be, right? So typically like an unhealthier mindset. So health is obviously a really hard spectrum to quantify because everyone has a different marker, but everyone has some degree of understanding about where do they want to be in their health, right? And so if you're getting advice from someone who isn't where you want to be and they're somewhere in the middle, you really need to be cautious about whether or not you take that person's advice, right? Because they clearly aren't where you want to be. And by taking on their advice, it could potentially slow you or stop you in your progress to getting to where you want to be. And it's really hard. And what I'm talking about here is from people like well-meaning friends and family members and, all these kind of people who aren't necessarily upholding those same values and virtues that you want to move towards. Or maybe they're questioning like, oh, why are you getting up and doing cold showers? That's crazy. Why are you doing all this exercise? Why are you go to a family meal, and I've had to do this at times, be like, oh no, I'm not eating that at the moment, or I'm not doing this at the moment. And you've got to, and if someone's saying to you like, oh, why are you doing that? Like, oh, it's so stupid, or the rest of it, like, they'll be like, oh no, don't eat that. I've heard that's nonsense. For the rest of it, be like, that's advice I'm going to have to ignore, right? Because you aren't where I want to be. And I think the last part of this is people who have smaller dreams for your life than you do, right? And I think it's a really important thing to understand. Like, if you have people in your life who have smaller dreams for your life than you do, you really need to start ignoring some of their advice.
That is great. Yeah. That is so good. I've never actually heard of that before, but that is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that really is. I'm thinking about that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think this is a big one, because I think that because they're in that inner circle of ours, we take on so much, we add so much reverence and weight to what they say to us. But I think what we need to be able to do is step back and go, actually, you know what, right now, I need to focus on the journey that I'm going on and the people that I'm getting advice from who are, where I want to be, who have got the knowledge and all the rest of it. And I'm taking it on board. I'm not ignoring that you're doing it. I'm just not going to process it and action it, right? So that one was ignore health advice from unhealthy people. The next one is, we've kind of touched on it already, but health sticks to the person who gives it the most attention, right? So again, it's one of those things where a lot of people who are healthy, and people that are super healthy, it almost appears like health comes easy to them. But it doesn't. It's just they've compounded health for so long with certain things that it's really easy for them just to pick up a new thing, right? And to start doing it. And you've all got friends like that, they'll be the person who can just turn up and run really fast at a parent sports day, but they also can turn up on a football pitch and kick a football around and be really athletic, and they can go to park run on the weekends and they can do this, and they also eat well. And it's not hard, it doesn't look hard work for them. And it probably isn't. It probably was at the start, but because they've compounded so many health things, they keep stacking the skills of health. It becomes easier and easier as they've gone on. So what ends up happening is health is sticking to that person because they're giving it the most attention, right? If you just focus on your business, then guess what? That's what's going to stick to you, is your attention is going to be on your business. But right here, if you focus on areas of health, it will stick to you and you'll be able to stack that moving forward.
That is really good. Another good one. Yeah.
Nice. Next one. We stay unhealthy until we learn all the lessons that disease has to teach. Right. So you could say this about disease or just being unhealthy if you haven't had that before. But, we need to understand that things like obesity and type 2 diabetes are classified as diseases. So we stay unhealthy until we learn all the lessons that disease has to teach. So it's about asking yourself the question, what lessons do I need to be learning that I'm not, right? So let's say you're someone who's either got obesity, right? And you've got to understand, like, what lessons do I need to learn from being in this situation? It's like, okay, well, how did I get here? Okay, well, I probably ate a lot of things, right? Because you probably overate, right? And then you didn't overeat on salad or Yeah. So like, I probably over it on the wrong things, right? So what were some of those things that I probably shouldn't have done? I didn't exercise enough. I probably didn't exercise the right way if I was exercising, right? I was probably super stressed out at the time. I probably hated my job. Like I probably had a really bad relationship with my partner, with friends, with family, whatever it was. And if you go through it, you'll see all these lessons that disease state can teach you, and that you will stay unhealthy until you learn those lessons that got you to that point in the first place. If you don't learn them, you will repeat them time and time again because you're not cognizant, you're not being consciously competent about the effects that those had in your life. And therefore you're more easily going to slip into doing them because you're not aware that that was a problem. Right.
That's so, and I think that's really good because again, it's looking at it's taking a wide angle look, isn't it, at one problem. And there's a lot of talk around this injection, for weight loss injection, but the problem is that it causes you to lose muscle mass down the line. That becomes a problem. And what it only does is doesn't focus on the behavior, doesn't focus on your lifestyle, doesn't focus on who you hang around with, who you're listening to, who you're influenced by, what you do socially, all these things. It just focuses on one metric, which is weight.
Exactly.
And I think this is what I think is so well put, but I think this is where we sort of come from, is take a broad look at what's going on, because it's not just one thing.
It's never just one thing, and life doesn't exist as one thing, right? But I think, and again, to your point there, like it's about holding up a mirror to ourselves and being like, I am in this situation. Like I am overweight. I do have diabetes. I do, or whatever it is that you have. It may not be that. It may be eczema. Maybe it's digestive issues like we talked about. Maybe it's brain fog, whatever it is. Hold that mirror up to yourself and be like, I do have this. I'm going to stay here until I understand the lessons that I need to learn about how I've got here and why I'm staying here. And until I learn those lessons, I will stay in this state of health. And it's like, learn those lessons, like put that mirror up to yourself, figure out what is it in your life that's challenging you, and then how would you get out of it? And hopefully, again, by using some of the tools that we talk about, tools that are in the 28-day challenge, you should be able to find some things in there that are going to start moving you forward, but you must take that look in that mirror before you start, right? Because that shows you where you are right now. David Goggins talks a lot about it with continually doing a live autopsy on your life, right? It's like a continual, like, okay, what's the problem here? What's going on? How do I fix it, right? Continually having that process. Number 6, frugality drives innovation, right? So constraint on the resources and time will cause you to become creative. So it's about actually understanding that if you are short on time, it's a great thing, but you have to leverage it to become creative. Like you can get amazing 15-minute workouts in, you can get amazing half-an-hour workouts, you can get amazing 45-minute workouts in, you can get amazing 2-hour workouts in if you really want to, and it scales back the other way. But the point of it is that if you're finding it hard to kind of be creative with your gym stuff, be creative with your diet or nutrition, like constrain the time that you give yourself to do those things, to force yourself to become creative. So if suddenly you're like, I'm really bored of going to the gym right now, fine. Like maybe go, right, instead of going to the gym and just spending an hour meandering around trying different machines, just be like, right, today I'm going to go in, I'm going to do half an hour of work. Like that's all I'm going to allow myself to do is half an hour of work. I guarantee you'll go in there and you'll view those machines completely differently, because you'll go in there and you'll be like, right, I've only got half an hour. What am I going to do to get the most out of my workout in this half an hour? Versus, it's that paradoxical thing of time. Whereas I can't remember who I meant to look up today, but who talked about this. But if you have the time you allocate to a task will be the amount of time it takes to achieve it. Right, so you fill the space. So if I give myself half an hour to do a task, it will take me half an hour. If I give myself 3 hours to do a task, it will take me 3 hours, despite it being the same task, right? And it's not because it needed that much time. It's because the amount of time you allocate it is the amount of time you use it. So again, frugality drives innovation. So if you can constrain your resources, constrain your time, constrain your money around things, it will make you be more creative in the environments that you are, whether it's being creative around your nutrition, because you're not using money to solve the problem. You're going, right, how do I be creative? I've only got £10 a day for spending money. How can I make this £10 be more? How can I make £10 be really healthy as a lunch that also makes me satiated? And you're like, oh, okay, I've got to be creative now. It's not just I'm going to go chuck £10 at the place that I always go. You've now got to be creative with your money and your time.
It rings so true. I mean, I have it with my food. So a bit like you, I kind of allocate myself a certain number of hours on Sunday night to make food. And it's got to the point where I make the same thing over and over again, because I know that in that period of time I've got, I can make that meal. I know that it's nutritionally complete. I know it's going to hit my protein levels. I know it's going to be good for me. And I'm like, that's what I need to do. And again, it comes true to what you're saying in the mornings. Like my day with my work, I'm like, right, I know I can go for a run on that one day. So I always run. I know I can do this. And it's amazing when you are constricted, you like I said, you actually end up doing those things. And I feel I've got more of a benefit because I'm more involved rather than having 1 hour whilst I'm watching TV or maybe got a film on doing a workout at the same time. It's crazy. But like I say, if you're going to go, I'm going to go downstairs and do 50 minutes of workout, you go and smash it. Then you got to go and do something else. Yeah. So true.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah.
So it's kind of those things like put almost self-impose those constraints on yourself to become creative in the areas you're struggling in. So if you're struggling with your nutrition, like could you try constraining the amount of money you're spending on your nutrition so you can be more creative with it? Or constrain the time.
Exactly.
Like have you give yourself less time to meal prep or to whatever it is, and does that then make you act differently as a result of it? But you'll always find in anything, frugality always drives innovation. When you don't have enough, it'll force you to drive innovation. So if you don't have enough time, it forces you to become more resourceful in that time. Okay. Number 7, we make our health. Our health does not make us. I think this is a really important one, particularly as people go through their health journey towards the outcome they want to get to. Understanding that you get a lot of people who they really want this certain type of body. They want to be the certain type of weight. They want to look a certain way, weigh a certain weight. But the problem is at some point that's going to change, right? It doesn't matter how good your body is right now. Ultimately, the one thing you can't stop is change, right? It's inevitable. Progress isn't, but change is always inevitable. So whatever your weight is, it's going to change. Right? Whatever your body looks like today, it's going to change. If you can run a 10K under a certain amount of time, guess what? At some point, you won't be able to, right? And if we wrap up we make our health, we have this idea that our health makes us, right? And that, if I've got that body, that's where I wrap up a lot of my self-worth into, or the fact that I can run this 10K at this certain time, or the fact that I weigh this much on the scales, I wrap up a lot of my self-worth into it. We need to be really careful with doing that because at some point that's going to change. All right. What's more important is, so don't tie yourself self-worth up to the measures of your health, right? The ability to become healthy is the value, right? Not the health itself, right? Yeah. So your value lies in knowing how to lose the weight, in knowing how to run that thing, knowing how to get a body like that, not in having that body, right?
Yeah, I love that because that speaks to, it's not the journey, it's not a destination, it's the journey. And there's that gold medalist syndrome, isn't there?
100%.
And where there's more mental breakdowns after people win a gold medal if they win silver or bronze.
Yeah, 100%. So gold medal syndrome is basically this idea that most Olympic athletes are basically at their lowest when they get a gold medal.
That's it. Yeah. So
because what ends up happening is that ultimately you've achieved everything that you've been working your entire life for, and now you don't have any purpose, because what they lost was they lost the love of the journey about getting there. They're so fixated on the result, and often what it is misallocated representation of the emotional reward at the end. So what's going to happen is people go, if I get a gold medal, I will feel X, I will have X, I will do all these things, and they reload all this expectation on the gold medal. And ultimately, when they get there, it's not achievable, right? And the reality of the situation doesn't match what they had in their heads. Yeah. And ultimately, that's what leads to a lower quality of mental health and things of that nature. And I had this week, my patient of mine, I hadn't seen him for ages, came out to see me just before I saw him. He was running the London Marathon. He ran it, did amazingly well, did really, really good time. But he even said he was like a few weeks afterwards, he felt lost, right? Yeah. And it's because he'd had no purpose or drive, right? Because he was playing, and this is where we kind of bring me into the last one in a minute, but he was kind of playing a finite game, right? And I'm not going to jump too far into game theory here. Simon Singh addresses that really well, but just really quickly, you have two types of games that you can play. You have a finite game, which is where there's known players, there's set rules. So tennis, for instance, right? You can either have, a certain number of players on the pit, on the court, right? You have a court that's demarcated. There's one net, there's one ball on there. There's a certain point system whereby there's a clear defined winner at the end of it. The infinite game is where there are both known and unknown players. The rules can constantly keep changing, and the idea of an infinite game is to stay in it for as long as possible. And so what happens is when people do races like marathons and stuff like that, what they're doing is they've got finite games. It's like, I'm going to hit the marathon, but the problem is there's no infinite game. The really great quote is that the person who loves walking walks further than the person who loves the destination. Right? Yeah. And so if you love walking, you will continue to walk, and it doesn't, regardless of what points you hit where you're like, oh, I got here, great, this is really cool, but I'm just going to keep walking because I love walking. The person who loves the destination, what's the difference? One's playing the infinite game of I just love to walk. The other one's playing the finite game of I want to get to that destination. And so with our health, what we need to be doing is, it's not wrong to set up finite games in terms of goals and achievements as we go along the way, but we must be looking at, you don't win the game of health. That I just want to be playing the game for as long as possible. And this kind of brings me to number 8, which is health is a game treated as such, right? So you can't win a game unless you know you're playing one. Okay, so it's about this idea that we need to start thinking about health as being this really long game that we're playing. And yes, it's okay to have these goals, but how do I stay in this for as long as possible? And that really changed for me recently, of being like, right, I'm lifting weights at the gym and I'm following different people's programs. And I just got to the point where I was like, what do I enjoy doing? Like, what's the best thing for me in what I do? And it was like, I've recently changed things. So I've gone to a full body workout, because actually, you know what? There's days where I'm tired, I can't get to the gym, work gets in the way, whatever it is. And if I'm just sectioning out my body and body parts, then I might miss a chest day. I might miss legs for that week. And I'm like, I'm really bummed out, because I'm like, I didn't get to train that this week. Whereas when I do full body workouts, it doesn't matter, because I've hit every area of my body each workout.
That's great. What I do too.
Yeah. And it means that also I'm not absolutely ball bagged by the end of each session, because it's been spread out. But then I was also like, well, why am I trying to lift heavy weights? I don't particularly enjoy lifting heavy weights. It absolutely tanks my central nervous system. So I've gone back to hitting like 20 reps, like getting more volume into my training. And I look forward to going to the gym now. That's a far better game to play, one which works for my life, that I enjoy going to, that I'm going to keep going to, versus the one that I feel like I should be doing because of some prescribed, person on YouTube or person on wherever has said, this is the next thing, quickest way to get the result. Well, that's you playing the finite game of, okay, I want to get that result in 6 weeks. It's like, no. Like, and there's a really good quote, and it was a nutritional thing, but it was like, can you see yourself doing this for the rest of your life? Right. And if the answer is no, then you probably won't carry it on. And something that Warren Buffett said, which was, imagine that everything you bought from today onwards, you could never get rid of. Right. You could never get rid of it. You'd be a lot more careful about what you bought. Right. Yeah. And also you'd be a lot more careful about how it compounds over time. Right. So the value of that over time. So it's like, if you took on a diet, the next diet you take on is the next diet you have to have for the rest of your life, because you can't get rid of it. The next exercise program you take on is, you can't get rid of it. It's the next one you've got for the rest of your life. You would think differently before you pick that exercise program, before you pick that nutritional plan, if you could never get rid of it. Yeah.
And it's so interesting, because I listened to this the other day, which was quite scary, was this guy was saying, he was a psychologist, and he was saying that we basically think 90% of the same thoughts we thought on the previous day in today. So it's amazing how those thoughts are always compounded as well, isn't it? And like you said, if you're not cognizant of that, then that just becomes a compounding effect that then either compounds negatively moving forward, or if you kind of combine a lot of what you've been saying, it can actually compound in a real positive way. Be more resilient to what other people say about you and your health. Try and look at those everyday gains rather than the gain that you're looking for at the end of the year, or try and focus on being around good information, good people, and make good choices, and it's really interesting. Yeah. I think it's just, it's fascinating.
Yeah. So really, really cool. So that was number 8. So there was some of my more unconventional health statements, which I think was interesting, right? Because I think otherwise you get so many different people having their opinion about what you should do, what you could do, what you shouldn't do. And it's kind of going, look, we're here just to present different ways of thinking, different thought processes. And I thought this was a great way of maybe stimulating some people to think differently, which then may cause people to act differently around their health. So if any of these resonate with you, I hope that's really, I'm glad. As we've said a few times, we do have our 28-day fasting challenge. I think that will feed into a lot of these things here. I think it will help kind of push plateaus, get you to mix things up a bit, put different attentions into different things, different focuses into areas of your life that you're maybe not focusing on at the moment, and just really get health to stick to you in the way that you want it to, by building out a lifestyle after this, whereby you're going, okay, great, I've done this 28-day challenge. Out of this, what is it that if I had to keep and never let go of, what would I keep to let compound over time that I enjoyed doing? And then you can take that forward. That
is fantastic. That's a great way to end the podcast.
Nice. Well, there we go.
Well, thank you so much for joining us again. Really hope we see you again next week for episode 5.
Yeah, smashed it.
Nice.
Cheers.